We are honored to introduce our 4 guest speakers to discuss the theme of the disproportionate impact of climate change on women and girls, and how intersectional feminism and environmentalism go hand in hand. Diana Ishaqa is a Jordanian development practitioner, researcher, and artist working in the areas of women's rights, environmentalism, and social welfare. She is a former Chevening Scholar and a current Schwarzman Scholar. She has a master's in media, campaigning, and social change from the University of Westminster and works as a communications and fundraising manager at Sakina, an organization concerned with the future of adult orphans. Leah Wyman is an eco-activist and poet. She grew up in South Africa and has lived in Germany and Scotland. She holds an MA in International Relations and Sustainable Development and an LLM in Climate Change Law. Her poetry book, Dear Earth, merges art and activism to inspire change for the future. She has performed her poetry at COP27, where she was a youth delegate. Siawar Dus is a specialist in grant management, partner relationship management, and feminist funding. She holds an MA in Gender and Development from the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex in the UK and is a Chevening Scholar. She currently serves as the Program Officer for Feminist Crisis Response at Global Fund for Women. Maria Serra Oliveira is the co-founder of Fridays for Future in Barcelona and the spokesperson for the climate movement in Spain. She attended COP25 in Madrid to represent the European youth and has since attended COP26 in Glasgow and COP27 in Egypt. Maria currently works with Oxfam Intermon and the European Climate Pact. Finally, we present the host and co-moderator of the WOMENTUM 9th Digital Saloon, Nosra Ayeri and Yuba Darif. Nosra is the co-founder and executive director, Mina, of LEAD Initiative. She is a regular speaker at Human Rights International conferences with more than 20 years of experience in the international development field. She is a gender equality advocate with the belief that working on reaching an inclusive society in tackling equality issues is the best approach to reach gender equality. Yuba is a human rights activist and an advocate for LGBTIQ+ and bodily rights, gender equity, and sexual health. Yuba is the co-chair of the African Queer Youth Initiative, the president of T-Wanzer Alliance, and the founder of Roots Lab for Gender and Development, an organization working on gender-related issues to promote equity, equality, and freedoms in Morocco.
Welcome everyone to the 9th edition of the WOMENTUM Digital Saloon. So today we're going to speak about climate change. Climate change is a hot topic since a few decades now. So much has been told, but little has been done so far. Today, we're going to talk more precisely on the disproportionate impact of climate change on women and girls and how intersectional feminism and environmentalism go hand in hand. I'm here today as the moderator of this event. I'm Nosra Ayeri, and I'm pleased to have with me Yuba Darif from Morocco co-moderating. I'm honored also to tell you that we have today with us 4 brilliant guest speakers coming from 4 different countries. We have Siawar Dus from Tunisia. We have Maria Serra Oliveira from Spain. We have Leah Wyman from Germany, and we have Diana Ishaqa from Jordan. Before we dive deep into the discussion, let's hear more about this topic.
Climate change has exacerbated the vulnerabilities and inequalities experienced by women, particularly those who live in rural areas or the global south, and those who are Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. The climate crisis is not an isolated issue, it is a global one that transcends national borders. It disproportionately impacts women due to socioeconomic structures and unequal access to rights and resources. Studies show that in developing countries, only about 10 to 20% of women working in agriculture have land rights. Furthermore, the lack of data on the gendered impacts of climate change renders women and their needs invisible to policymakers and leads to gender-blind climate solutions. This is why, in the 9th edition of the WOMENTUM Digital Saloon, we are giving the floor to our high-level guests to tell their stories, and to address together the different aspects of how intersectional feminism and environmentalism go hand in hand.
Welcome again. So Leah will start the meeting with us, and she has a poem that she wants to deliver to us called Dear Earth. Leah, apart from being an activist, she's also an artist. Leah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Firstly, I like to say that feminism isn't just about women. I think that's a misconception that a lot of people often have. It is about fundamentally transforming the way that our patriarchal system works and how it oppresses those that are marginalized and reinforces stereotypes about how states work, about what roles humans are supposed to inhabit on Earth. But more specifically, I'd love to read to you a poem on ecofeminism. And in this poem specifically, I look at the connection between what is happening to women and what is happening to nature. But of course, it's not just about women. So that's just something that I wanted to preface and that I'm very excited to discuss further with everyone else on the panel today. So I'm reading you a poem from my poetry book, Dear Earth, called Ecofeminism. As women, we share so much with this earth. We are life givers and supporters. We go through seasons. We bloom and we bleed. The moon pulls us through our cycles. Our body completes some of the most incredible miracles. Women can birth a new life and soul onto the earth. But, like the earth, the female body falls victim to some of the most horrific crimes. It is objectified and abused. It is disregarded and degraded. It is beaten and burnt. Made to look a certain way, expected to perform certain functions, expected to please, expected to give without demanding in return. Made to be inferior. Mother Nature gives and gives, provides us with everything we need for life. Yet we burn and beat her. She's objectified and disregarded. She's polluted and poisoned. Her most precious gems are extracted and removed. Her skin is scratched open. Her lungs are burning. Slowly but surely, bit by bit, she's torn down. Yet she's expected to give as she has always given, to look as beautiful as she has always looked, to support life like she always has. Beaten, burned, abused, objectified, disregarded, polluted, and poisoned. Who are we to think we can do everything? Who are we to think our actions don't have consequences? We cannot survive without Earth, and we cannot survive without women. We need each other. It is time to learn respect. It is time to learn what it means to love. Thank
you so much, Leah.
Thank you so much.
Very beautiful poem and very expressive of like what the environment and women are facing today. So my question is directly directed to Siwar. Siwar, like today we hear the statements about that the oppression of women and the degradation of the environment are direct consequences of patriarchy and capitalism. To what extent do you agree with that? And what are the main arguments that like you advance yourself compared to the conventional wisdom?
Thank you, Nisa, and thank you so much, Leah, for this amazing poem. For me, I know that, and I agree with ecofeminism when it posits a very clear connection between the oppression of women and the oppression of nature. I don't want to stand in an essentialist point of view, and thank you for Leah also for clearing that out, that oppression doesn't really go only, it's not really facing women or addressing women. It's it's really facing a lot of people who are just marginalized generally. We can talk about people who have non-conforming gender identities. We can also talk about indigenous communities, people of color. It depends on a lot of intersections of age, race, location, etc., nationality. So I would say that oppressive mechanisms are the same. So when an oppressive system works, it has the same dynamics. So we can see it really clearly, really like addressing nature. So nature, we can see that since the greed of the Industrial Revolution, also the greed of human beings really for accumulation of wealth, which is connected to capitalism. We see that we have done so much damage to Earth that we can ever imagine. We thought that we are like, making creations. We wanted to like create plastic just to, fly faster, just to do better, to accumulate more wealth. And then we see the damage that has to be done to the Earth. Now, when we think about marginalized population, it really follows the same mechanism of not really caring much about the interest of these people. They are not the ones who are the ones who are accumulating wealth. No, we can see also this divide as well, even for climate change, for the impact, how it happened, the difference between global north and global south. The accumulation of wealth, and then the ones who are facing the impact. We see that I don't know if you heard of Cyclone Freddy. It's the cyclone that is hitting southern of Africa. These are repeated cyclones. Africa really contributes only to 3% of the emissions, and Africa is really gets the most powerful, most devastating impact of climate change. So there is a very clear connection between the oppressive mechanisms that we can see. Of course, it lays out differently, but the logic or the rationale behind it, I think it's the same, which is giving the light, or just giving the profit or accumulation of wealth to some and just ignoring completely others.
Thank you so much, Siwar. Very interesting insights on like ecofeminism and the relationship between the degradation of the environment and oppression, and everything in relation to capitalism and the patriarchy when it comes to ecofeminism. Leah, would you like to say more about this?
Yeah, firstly, thank you, Sinwar, for highlighting all of that. And also, I'm glad you mentioned Freddy, because actually it's one of the longest lasting, furthest traveled cyclones that we've seen on Earth. And yeah, quite coincidentally, I was, I grew up in South Africa, so I was there for the last 4 months, and I happened to be in Mozambique when Freddy made landfall, which was very scary. Obviously, we were the first passed over Madagascar. Madagascar's obviously had been hit with a lot of cyclones. And to really see that in an area of the world where there's so just, yes, people are used to cyclones to some extent, but there is just no infrastructure for it. It's a very low-lying land. And those that are most affected are often women, because they are in the ones sort of having to take care of households. And then also there's a lot of new research coming out linking domestic abuse to the increase of domestic abuse to exacerbated climate change and weather events. And if we see Freddy did actually something kind of interesting. It did a weird switch around. It kind of disintegrated a bit, went back out to sea, and then came back, hit Madagascar again, and then hit Malawi. And that's one of those things where, it's just really long-lasting weather, but it's not something that's discussed globally. And I feel quite shocked actually that Freddy wasn't discussed more globally. It was very scary to watch and to be there. And I was in a very fortunate situation that I could stay safe. But I think the worst impact was really the fact that, these prolonged rains and these prolonged weather events that really prevents people from being able to go on with the daily chores of life and being able to to carry on subsistence and farming and, for example, rely on tourism, then obviously there's not much that comes to that area anymore. So it was a really quite frightening experience, I have to say, but also quite eye-opening in terms of what is happening in the world and how much climate change is already impacting people around the world. It's not, yes, it is about our future and we can do so much to prevent climate change from getting worse, but the reality is that climate change is already hitting us around the world. And those that have done the least are those that are most impacted.
Thank you so much, Leah, for the poem, for sharing the poem, and also for your intervention. You had some descriptions in your poem like horrific, objectified, abused, degraded, and those are very strong adjectives and descriptions. How do you think those small initiatives, individuals, change makers can be actors in make change in this topic? This is my question to Leah, but also another question to Sarah, which is there's when in this conversation we talked about how there's double standards somehow about how things happens in the global south. Not they're not every time have the same coverage and the same importance. What's your take on this? The difference between how we take climate change from the south to the north, and how this. What do you think about this?
Okay, I'm going to start by responding to your first question. Those are strong words, but I think sometimes we need to use stronger words when we talk about climate change and the impact that it can have and is having, and about the reality that is being faced around the world. Because I think there's still a lack of understanding of how really it is impacting futures around the world and the extent that it reaches into every problem that we are facing in the world and the extent to which it intersects with social justice issues. And I think that's something that I wanted to highlight. Also because it's just so frustrating to see what is happening in the world and what is happening to Earth and the extent that, this is such a beautiful planet that we're on. If you really look at, the amazing nature that there is and the animals that technically coexist on Earth with us as well. And how that is then just completely disregarded for the fact that we as humans, I think, often believe we're here as visitors and forget that, we're part of Earth. So destroying Earth is also destroying us. And I think I just really, with that poem, when I wrote it, I was just so frustrated with everything I was seeing in the world in terms of what is happening to those most affected by climate change, what is happening to women, what is happening to nature, and just started seeing all these connections and intersections between social justice and climate justice.
Thank you. And how do you think small initiatives, one actor, one individual, one change maker can impact the change and have the impact on Earth?
That's true. I think it's hard to answer because there's so many things that can be done. And I think it's easy to be overwhelmed by how big the problem of climate change and different social justice problems is. But I think there's a lot that can be done by everyone to counter certain gender stereotypes or even stereotypes of what states are, what meant by strong state was meant by weak state, and how that often embodies what the characteristics that are given to women and that are given to men, for example, or how caring for the planet and caring in general is characterized as a female characteristic, how being emotional or passionate about the planet is something that is often associated with women. For example, there's a lot more female activists, climate activists, which is amazing, obviously, to see so many young female leaders in this field. But at the same time, it makes you wonder, like, but where the men, where are the other people, where are the world leaders that we need to be leading this? Because the reality is that world leaders, a very, very small percentage of world leaders are women, and even less percentage are women that are actually disproportionately affected by climate change. Those do not have places in leading rooms. And I think having to counter some of those stereotypes that we put out onto, let's say, men, on what is defined as a strong male or masculinity, then really impacts not only females but all genders around what is associated as a successful person. And that also then impacts again on women, because there's a lot of women that now embody those male characteristics, or feel like they have to embody those male characteristics in order to be seen as a legitimate leader, or to be seen as a legitimate scientist, person, whatever, that is speaking truth to power and isn't just being emotional or caring or overreacting to the climate crisis. And I think there's a lot that individually people can do, especially in that regard, to counter some of those stereotypes, to challenge situations, let's say in workplaces or in society, where those stereotypes are reinforced, for example. And then obviously there's so much to do with regards to sustainability, that every one of us can examine which areas in our lives we can live a more gentle life, a more sustainable life. And yeah, that's obviously a whole nother topic to discuss. But I think
Definitely. Thank you so much, Leah. I'll stop you here so that like also we don't dive into like questions of also gender equality. But definitely, we totally agree with you on like this divide between the inclusion of women in decision making, and like also what women should sacrifice to be in decision making, and how they are judged also. Maybe also to go to Maria and to Diana, and like the question of global south and global north is very important here when we tackle the issue of climate change. So today we say that the global south, as Yuba said, is the most impacted, where like also there is the least interest to this topic, whether from decision makers or also more from youth, if I might say, also based on my observation and what I see about also how we include climate change risk in our daily habits, right? So I would like to hear like your, I mean, I'm not like a fan of like, you know, big names, global south, global north, because also they are ideological terms and they have so much political, insinuations in them. But maybe Maria, coming from Spain, what do you think about it? And then Diana, coming from Jordan, what do you think about it? So I would like to hear you both. So Maria.
Good morning. I wanted to start by saying that I absolutely adored your poem, Leah. I'm considering buying the book after this conference because it resonated a lot with things that I think a lot, but I don't think I've ever put in such beautiful words. And it starts by saying that climate change is at the stake of it, at the heart. It's just a highlighter of inequalities that are already there and that we've done for centuries. So it makes no sense to talk climate change without talking feminism or colonialism or anything that's is structured and in the core of our system, because it's how we got to climate change. Climate change is a symptom of it. So it makes absolutely no sense to talk about any social issue without climate change in it, or vice versa. So that said, I absolutely liked one of the lines of your poem that said that as Earth, women fall victims to horrific crimes. Because for me, horrific crimes, my brain went directly to exploitation. And we exploit women like we exploit Earth and like we exploit minorities. And at the end of the day, it is the same system that, as Siwa said, it views women as resources, unlimited resources that can be exploited. And that is what the global north also does to the south. So everything is interconnected. Like Siwa said, system of oppressions do act the same. It's a system and it replicates in several levels and several terms. So it is very interconnected. I don't think you can understand climate justice without like global justice. And this is how we call it here. That said, I do want to preface that one of the most important things that we can do as activists from the North is just to shut up, which I try to do, and lead spaces and give spaces to women from the South, which is what is never done. Because at the end of the day, some women are in decision-making spaces in the North, not many as like it should be, and most of the time they don't represent women's issue, which is an absolute problem that we have to face. But it is true that we have those spaces, and most of the time women from the South don't. So it's very important that we give these spaces and we try to create them at least. Um, that said, I think in activism, at least in youth activism, I've seen a trend of doing this, and I hope it gets better over the years. I definitely think it's a learning process. At the end of the day, we are teenagers. And if I look back at Maria from 2019, which I was 16 at the time, I definitely do think that I know much more about feminism and the interconnectedness of it and how it connects to the global South now than I did back in the day. Um, so it's still a learning process, and I think so much of it comes from just listening to women in the South, because at the end of the day, I have no idea of how it is. I live in Spain, which is, again, a very much sexist society with its own problems. Women do die here every year. Like we have at least 70 to 80 women killed a year here in Spain, femicides. So it is a profoundly patriarchal and very problematic country to live in as a woman, but it is not nearly as much as Latin America. It's uncomparable to other places. So I think the best thing we can do is to listen and like sit down and listen of what can we do and how can we approach this. Climate change wise, I do think there is a trend that we should settled, that is it's that because we think that the South has this like dichotomy, like this duality between now versus future. Climate activists from the North have this tendency of speaking in future terms, like this is going to happen in 20 years, this is what's going to happen in 50 years, or like it's my future that you're robbing from me. Within climate activists from the South, what they do is like, hey, like this was my past yesterday, like I am being flooded now, like Freddie was this year, like it is in actual terms and it's happening now. And I think this is a duality that we need to really accentuate, because it is not the same to be asking for rescue at the moment and to be demanding a future. So there's different urgent and timings to it, and I think we need to address that. I also wanted to address how, for some reason, at the same time, we've been trying, I think, to be in denial of how bad it is going to be in the North, because it is true that when we started activism, it was mostly a future term thing. And I remember saying like, oh yeah, we have 10 years to stop this and to like let it be okay so we don't pass the 1.5 and these horrific things don't happen. But now I think we're in denial that like countries like Spain most probably will be as impacted as the South. Spain has a desertification rate of 70% by 2030, which is not 2050, which is insane. Like that's 70% of the country. So we will need an insane amount of adaptation and loss and found money and funds that we are not even looking for, because we're busy looking for the South, which is absolutely happen and needs to happen. But I think a lot of people in the North are in denial that it is going to be bad for them too. And we should be able to address both without facing consequences of feeling like we are not helping the South enough, because at this point I felt like in a lot of conferences that we have been talking to so much at other countries that like my own people don't know that how bad it is going to be for them. So I think we need to address the duality of how do we as a global can treat all of it. That said, I am gonna preach my own words and shut up.
Thank you, Maria. Diana.
Hello, everyone, again. It's so good to be here with such gifted people and with everything that you have had to say. And I think that even though we are from different countries and we see different contexts, we seem to have very similar values. which is really interesting because we must have found those thoughts and grew into them through different experiences. From what I see here, as a person based in the Arab states, is that climate action and environmental collapse are events and realities which the same governments that ignore the rights of women and minorities and don't see them as urgent are also likely to ignore and not see as urgent and something that needs to be acted upon. And in the region where I live, Jordan is surrounded by at least one type of conflict at each side of the border. The future of conflict trends are over resources like water, in which we are really scarce. And in conflicts, women and minorities are used in acts of revenge as well as exploitation. And that's why it is us, women, who lose the most when armed conflicts start and when there is a state of unrest and absence of the rule of law. And in this competition over power, resources, and influence, it does not take us into consideration, like everyone has said here, and especially Maria put an accent on. They think of us as resources with no ending, and thus we can always be there. And this is also seen in caregiving duties that are being given to women in the areas that are affected the most by climate action. It is seen as work that should not be even thought about being compensated. The idea itself makes people laugh. So entire economies are based on our backs. And when decision makers decide it's a good time to start a war, it's also us who lose the most. And in environmental forums, I think the most successful form of recycling is that of the careers of former war criminals, who are people who destroy the earth, destroy women and minorities, but then get to whitewash their crimes, appear on forums, speak about the environment, and talk about what to do next. Whitewashing their impact on earth, on us, on our future. And the also other things that we see in everyday life. For example, most women who work in really land-related industries do not own this land and do not own the means of production, and they don't have a say in what happens next. Even in simpler things like the right of inheritance in the Arab states, family fights over making the women lose out all forms of capital and try to exploit their rights. So less and less women are present, powerful, and influential. And a lot of people like to laugh it off or make it less of it when we say that climate is an issue of women and minorities and groups that have experienced historical marginalization. But people who are capable to feel this much distance from the cause are the same people who are causing the problem. And I think still where I live, the idea of being involved in environmental action is seen as dreamy to green or pink or whatever people like to call. And they said, why should I care about something when everything around me is collapsing, when I can return and find no home in place or no country in place? But this is the problem, is that the future and the future scenarios are not owned by us. They are owned by the same people who don't care about the quality of water we drink, about the type of food that we have to eat, about the type of air we have to breathe and transport we have to take to work. So everything is really interconnected, and I would say it's always amazing when people from the global north like to take ownership, but we also like. It's important to remember we cannot answer for what men in power has done using their influence. We can be very aware of that and we can express solidarity, but it is them who should be put accountable for what has been happening and the systems they continue to benefit from and grow even more powerful. And it's just really good to be here with you to continue this conversation.
Thank you so much, Diana. So from what you hear from both of you is that, like we call it today, the global south, global north, but in the end also there are a lot of like similarities between, I mean, the different two blocks, if I might say, of the world, with like also a few exceptions. So this brings me to like another questions. Today we say that climate action and climate change as like a hot topic or an issue, global issue, is an elitist movement. All right. So, I mean, not so many people are involved when it comes to, I would say the median citizen, or like or what we say in French, also citoyen lambda, or like the average citizen. Okay. So like we see a lot of intellectuals, we see a lot of well-read people talking about this issue, but I mean, let's face it, not so many youth. I mean, if we say like youth caring about like the climate and talk about it, right? So like we would say a few youth. What is your take on that? And there, I'll open the discussion to everyone who would like to jump in and like speak about this elitism versus non-elitism, which also a phenomenon. If we link feminism to environmentalism, we see it in feminism. Feminism today, we're talking about neo-feminism, but without getting in so much in detail in that. But also feminism has become an elitist movement, and we see a lot of like argumentation saying it like feminism today does not represent all the women in there. So please feel free who would like to jump in and give thoughts on this.
I can start off the conversation, if that's okay. So yes, thank you, Nasra, for clearing that up. It is very clear that climate change is such a like a loaded fancy words, usage, etc. But I've done a research on Tunisia and Morocco, asking civil society organizations and also people around about the subject. And one of the findings of my research was very clear. The namings and the wording is the problem, but people are facing their realities. The reality is real. So like when we talk about Tunis, we have water shortage as well, similar to Jordan as well. But in Tunis, we had this, the problem has started, I think, in the 80s, but because of also people in power, as well as Diana beautifully mentioned and explained, the issues like stay hidden because of also, it's also oppressive system, it's dictatorship, it's a lot of history. So we don't really face these problems. But then when we go to the average citizen, when I talk with people who are in agriculture fields, they would say clearly, they don't say climate change, but they say, my livelihood is really at risk. I don't have water to water the plants. I have to shift. They tell me that I have to shift everything that I have been years planting to other things, which, alternative agriculture nowadays, just what are in Tunis now, everything in our agriculture needs to change to something more sustainable because we don't have water. So people are living the effects of the palpable effects of climate change. We just don't have to name it the same way that the global north says it in a very fancy conferences, but the reality of it is here today and has been here for a while as well. North Africa, we have a lot of issues. Maria mentioned as well the issues of Spain for like the desertification of the lands, etc. This also is the case for us. So I think that the issue should be way more inclusive. It should open the doors for people to talk about it in the way they talk about it. In my findings as well, I found some people who relate what is happening in climate change to religion, for example. I think that's extremely important to leave people the words and the references they have to express what they live in their own way without being judging. And that's what elitism is about. It's saying, oh, we know the words. This is how it says. No, that's not. I think that people's lives, realities are the experience, are the valuable experience that we need to listen to. And that's what feminism is about, as Maria mentioned, about listening. It's about actually living the space for people to talk about what they are living, how this crisis is affecting them, without any judgment and without bringing any words and language to it, because that's what global north is great as naming things, just let's give this a label, let's give this that another label, let's do that another box. But we as have our realities that really tell us how we are facing this, how are we living this. We just have to find a place where we actually talk about it in our own words, not really in the words that is expected from us. I think COP should have been the space, but we have here activists who are very aware of this. So I'm sure you have your take on this. I see Maria smiling, but just I'm just gonna give you one number, and I'm gonna give this floor to someone else to talk. Leah, you mentioned that women are on the front line of activism because they are the ones as well who feel the oppression more. But let me tell you, at COP27, out of 110 leaders, we only had 7 women in the leaders' decision. So it's about representation. It's about living the spaces for people to talk and express, but also in their own words, how they live their realities.
Thank you so much, Siwar. So 2 minutes for you, Maria, and then 2 minutes for you, Diana, to answer this question.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I've been recently writing an article about this because I somehow put myself into the reunable debate in Spain, which you can only imagine it's full of 40 to 50-year-old white men. Scary place to be. But thing is, what I've observed there is that not only is elitist, it's very sexist. And I think it's one of the reasons why the debate on climate change and climate action has been postponed for 40 years, is that these people have made a career out of discussing with very fancy words and very fancy titles what we should be doing in 20 years when they will not even be alive. And I think it goes back to a very capitalistic, individualistic system that is also patriarchal. And I strongly believe that in an ecofeminist perspective, most women don't do this. I don't think women go with their name and title to write articles to discuss to other women about what they're doing wrong and spend 10 years of their life doing this. And I think that's why it's very elitist, because it has been academic, it has been very put to a high level where most people can reach. And so it just keeps in like a cycle that it's never ending. And most of the issue, I think it's an ego issue. It's your title, your research, your name and last name invention. And if it's not there with your last name and invention, then it's not useful and it will never be used and it's not good. And I will fight whoever says otherwise. So I think that's one part of the problem. Here in the north, there's also a huge lack of communication. We have great scientists. We have people that know so much and that like could be preaching to general population, and they just don't. I think it's mostly out of a fear of communication. I talked to scientists, and they've said to me that, like, like my job is to do science, not to communicate that science, which it is technically true, but at the same time, this is how we got here. So there is a BOCA problem that I think youth is trying to fix. I think one of the most important functions of youth in this movement is to act as a translator or as an amplifier of science to population, or of complicated issues to population. I think it's where most of my job is to take very complicated debates and take them to high schools, because it's where the kids that are going to face these debates are there, not in high-end conferences. COP was an absolute nightmare. I think we would all agree with that. I still have nightmares about it, but I think one of the most important things is that as a woman, you feel so not welcomed in these spaces. I feel like such an imposter. Like, not only I thought I was giving dirty looks by all men in the area, being like, who are you doing? Why are you here? There is always a question of like, who are you? Why are you here? How did you get here? I thought it was the most asked questions. Like, we did not inherently belong there. We were kind of like occupying space that was not ours. Which only means occupying voice that was not ours, that was supposed to be, a white man in science. So I think we need to change that, and I'm not sure how. Probably by occupying more of its space. But I do see, like what Siwa said, that it felt like you were not supposed to be there at all.
Thank you so much, Maria. Very raw comments. And that's what we need today, I think, when it comes to also speaking reality about what's happening currently. Diana.
It's always good to speak after Maria because she gives me the right inspiration. I can maybe top up on what she's been saying about participation, because many environmental programs are geared towards a very specific audience. You have to have certain degrees, which require certain amount of wealth to afford. They require speaking English, French, other languages, and they require also employment in sectors that are really confined. For example, like environmental policies and others, you are likely to have had a certain career and a certain education to get there and to be accepted as one of those participants. It's not always the case, but this is what I tend to see. And some years ago, a couple of years ago, or maybe three, I was working on the Environmental Youth Manifesto for COP26, and I managed to advocate for a few points about the need for localizing the climate action narratives. Because quite often they don't speak to the realities of people who live in war prone regions, where the environment can seem like something dreamy compared to the everyday destruction happening around them. And people in many parts of the regions where I work, I think, may not respond to an international organization, because quite often they are linked to colonialism and foreign power dynamics that take place in war prone regions. But they might be able to respond to something more, may sound somewhat populist, but if you say something like, this is your land, this is your inheritance, this is the land of fathers and grandmothers, and so on, people are more likely to respond at times. And while this may not be the ideal scenario that I would hope for, but there is a certain theory of change that we need to follow, and sometimes certain compromises and speaking in ways which we do not necessarily think speak to us, but speak to other people. And definitely the idea of fundamentalism and purity is present in the environmental movement. There is an attempt to single out people because they don't wear certain fabrics, or don't behave in a certain way, or don't follow certain trends, or don't get products for certain companies, or aren't like hanging out with same circles or something like that. Even the idea of attending COP conferences, people think if you are there, then you are a legitimate environmental person, and if you are not, you must be just trying to make something out of yourself. Whereas so many people just choose not to be there, or are not able to be present. So I think that all of these issues are connected: identity, privilege, and participation in environmental conversations.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Diana. I think gives us also an insight of like what really needs to be done. And also sometimes, as we say, within like activism movements, there are also things to adjust, to correct, because sometimes like, I mean, some groups take the movement with them and becomes like more and more elitist without like also including all the voices. So we run like in kind of like excluding people while we are fighting for inclusivity in a way. All right, so like we are running out of time. So we have one question before like we move to the end notes or like end comments from each one of you. So today, concretely, if we talk about like how we make the voices of like different groups, and more specifically women and girls, because today we're talking women and girls, into this fight like for climate justice. We always say we have to include women, we have to include girls, but it seems to us, if we have critical thinking, it's like blah, blah, blah. Because as we say all the time, for instance, for gender equality, we have to include like LGBTQI++. We have to include people with handicaps. We have to include, you name it. And then it ends like to a few KPIs on different, I mean, projects, development projects. So concretely today, and I mean, if you name what are like the basics or like the most urgent priorities to really have an inclusive action plan, I would say, for women, what is it like that needs to be done? And really like bottlenecks we're speaking here. We're not speaking about like what has to be done. What are the bottlenecks that we need to kind of maybe blow up? Okay, and here I'll move back to Leia and Siwar.
Yeah, that's a challenging first question to start with. I think there's obviously not just one answer, and I think we need to get rid of that mentality for climate change as well. That it is, I think we often at this point talk about just getting stopping fossil fuels, for example, which absolutely we do need to, and that's one of the key bottlenecks that we definitely have in actually moving on forward with climate action. But yeah, it's more than that. Yeah, it's the way that biodiversity is also treated. It's the way that extraction happens, for example. And I think it's really about transforming how our systems function and transforming also how COPs work. You know, the fact that we've had 50 years, with Stockholm, 50 years of environmental conferences, now 51 this year, that have been happening since that very first conference on humans and the environment, and still it's just talk. That is problematic. And I think it comes back to what all of my wonderful panelists have been speaking about just now, in terms of creating that elitist system around who talks about climate change and who knows about it. Because yes, it is a very complex topic, and I think we need to be aware that that is probably a complication in terms of communication in general about what is happening to our world. And I think education can be one of the biggest factors there. And that again leads our fights for justice together, climate change and education, because women, we know, face some of the biggest struggles within education globally. And we need to make sure that education is transformed, and not just in the global south. My gosh, education in the global north around what climate change is, how it's educated in school, and in general, the things that are taught in school are just not preparatory for our world. I think we are just not, as young people of this world, I think, are at this point, yes, because I think it's because of social media, are more and more educated, but it's not because of school. I think our school systems and education system are still very much lacking in actually teaching the skills that we need for our future, and that is critical thinking and not just a reinforcement of current ideologies. For example, when we look at economy, the subjects such as like economics, that teaches very standard practices that are just not fit for our future anymore. And that needs to be challenged within schools, within universities, and across the globe. And I think that is a really critical point for the global north, to look inwards and look at how are people being educated, and how are people also, how is adults being educated in the workforce, because they need to learn about climate change that maybe they didn't learn about at school at all, and learn about how it relates to their career, because climate change relates to every single career and to all of us. And there is something that in all of our fields we can do to address climate change.
Thank you, Leah, for the interesting insight. Siwar, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Leah. Education is extremely important. I would talk, as I am a gender practitioner, when I think about when we're working in development or even human rights generally, or even humanitarian, the one thing that we learn from to build programs that address it is data collection. And I think that today, when we look across, the development or whatever. I don't really like the word development, but the whatever what we're doing, human rights generally, it's based on the data that we collect, and data is not neutral. Data definitely comes with a lot of biases. And it's very interesting when we are thinking about transformative approaches, right? Because now we cannot just, we need transformation, we need transformative approaches. We need to rethink how we collect data. I in different programs that I've worked on, it was always eye-opening when I really dig into the stories, that it challenges everything that I have perceived. So like, for example, like when we talk about Cyclone Freddy today, the cyclones that happen in Southern Africa, a girl in Malawi, she would be the one who's in charge of getting out the mud out of the house, because she's the girl, which would actually it would be like a problem because she wouldn't really go to school because she's the one. Like I'm hearing the story. I heard the story from one of the girls that I met, and she was telling me, you know, once I get the mud out and I think I'm gonna go to school, it happens again, and then I don't have school outfits to go. These are stories that might, you know, for people who work, they would know, but for people who don't really work in this, wouldn't really think about it. There are a lot of links that relate being a woman or being a girl or being a gender nonconforming person or being a minority or being indigenous from indigenous community are realities that they face that it's not really collected. These stories are not really collected. They're not even like thought of. It's kind of like we take it for granted. Like we take for granted what women and girls and these realities are. It's just representative. So I think to start actually developing programs that are really inclusive, that are transformative, we need to collect these stories and take them extremely seriously. So then when we want to work in programs, we do. Like in Tunis, for example, I was having a conversation with one civil society organization director, and he was telling me, you know what, Siwan, whenever we work on programs, it's very hard for me to get women into the program because you know they cannot really be with men in one place. We need to craft spaces for women specifically for them to hear their voices. So there are a lot of ways that we need to address, rethink, recraft from the start in order to challenge the fact that data is not neutral and to actually get data that is feminist in a way that listens to people's realities and get them a space where we can actually address it, craft something that is really personalized, tailored to the needs of people.
Thank you very much, Siwar. So data collection and education are very important entry points to work on, like very seriously to tackle this issue. So it was a very interesting and insightful discussion. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I would like to hear from all of you, like in a few words, what are like the end notes to this discussion? What are like any final thoughts that you want to, convey to our audience and that you all feel inspired to say today on our platform? So I'll start with Diana.
Thank you very much for this conversation. I think that now is a good time to think of trust as a currency that we need to use and trade in our work, because there is a loss of trust in civil society and in activists, especially as the demonization of civil society is ongoing in our parliaments and in other parts of the world as well. And the same goes for their efforts to undermine and demonize feminist activists as well. And there is a need to localize climate action narratives. Because, for example, the term feminism is not very common in the local scene here, but the term sisterhood is original to the Arab states, for example. And so is the same. And to bridge the gaps of understanding that such movements have always existed here. They are not a Western invention. They have started here as well, and they have their own forms and shapes that we need to believe in. And finally, to eliminate this academic arrogance and the push for purity in the environmental movement. Everyone can be present. They can be present in various ways, levels, and types of commitment, but it's important to get everyone to talk, because the more we push away people, the more they find a platform in other avenues. And we are never sure if they are extreme, radical in violent ways. So that's why it's important to be a better space. And overall, I'm just very glad to be here, and I hope that we continue to have this conversation in other spaces as well.
Thank you so much, Diana. We're very glad to have you here too. Maria?
Thank you. I think the most important thing is that, as the IPCC, the latest one, says, climate change is a feminist issue, and it's going to affect women the most, and it's the thing that's going to affect women the most for years to come. So it is impossible for us to look at feminism without climate change. And I also think it's very important in a very polarized world, because the North, at least, is so polarized that we can't do anything right now about climate change. And one of the most important problems, I think, is that we have operated in climate conversations with a language that has made it so climate change is a left issue, and that we can't. We can't have, because it is so important that it is a baseline. We need to make climate change a common baseline for every ideology, because we cannot spend 40 more years fundamentally arguing between us how we act on climate change. So I think that maybe changing the vocabulary we speak about things, including more people in the room, even if we don't agree with them, it's crucial right now to build a more wide common base that we can act on.
Thank you so much, Maria. Leah?
Thank you, everyone, today for your words of wisdom and knowledge and experience of what you've, seen around the world. You know, we are at a critical time, and yes, we're sitting here and we're talking about this. And I think as everyone, we need to move from talking to action. But at the same time, we also need to create more spaces where people can talk about this, because as climate change worsens, climate anxiety worsens, and the impacts of climate change are deeply impactful for our health and for our well-being of our planet. And creating spaces for everyone to talk about climate change is important, because caring isn't something that is just inherently female. It's something that's inherently human. And it needs to be something that is celebrated among all of us and among everyone listening. So at this point, to the listener, I would like to say that honor the way that you care for the world and for the people around you. Be proud of it. Be proud of being here and listening to this conversation. And I hope we could share something that will inspire you to act. Because at this point in time, we need this active sense of hope that is about people going out and seeing what is wrong in the world and deciding to change it. Because this is our reality, and it's our time to step up to create a different one.
Thank you so much, Leah. Last but not least, you are?
Thank you, everyone. I've been very inspired today by everything you said, and it's going to give me a lot to think about as well. I would like to end by saying that we should never get to the point where we are normalizing talking about these issues and just, making as if feeling that this is like just normal. This is my fear, and I want to just put it out here. And I think my fear is even double for the places that have a social calculus that they have already been, just fighting and just living through hell, really. Places where there is war, there is conflict, there is poverty, hunger, etc. My fear is just to feel like we are normalizing that these regions are used to. No one gets used to this. No one. Like the earthquake that happened in Syria and Turkey, Syria, with everything that has happened to the Syrian people did not really get used to it. They didn't really feel like the earthquake didn't affect them. Human beings are human, and we should always remember that. The repeated cyclones that are happening in Southern Africa does not make people resilient towards it. It only makes them more and more vulnerable. So I think it's extremely important to remember the social calculus. The natural disaster is not really natural because it doesn't come at an end point when there is nothing before. We always need to remember what has happened all before that crisis hits, and take it into consideration when responding. So this is a call for people to be empathetic, to always be kind and care for people, and just really feel when there is a disaster, when it hits anywhere, we always need to feel it. It just doesn't have to be the one that is making the headlines, like seeing for Cyclone Freddy, really sadly, we're not talking about it. People have been lost their lives. There are people who are still lost in the mud. They couldn't find them. And still we're not talking about it because we kind of are used to these regions where bad news are happening. This is just unfair, unkind, and unacceptable. So this is just a call to always be empathetic and kind for everyone, and keep the conversation going. Keep always being scared for what climate change can do, and everywhere, not in specific places other than others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Siwar. So I'll defer to my co-moderator, Yuba Darif, for his final thoughts regarding this discussion.
Yes, thank you so much, Nusra. This is something that we are aware of, but this panel made us realize that climate change is a human issue. It's not specific to any gender or anyone, but it's a human, and it requires a collective action, and that's also time urgently to act. It's a call for action. All what's happening all around the world lately is a call for urgent action, and especially collective action. Thank you so much to our panelists. I didn't realize how time was running so fast, and I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, from my side, I would like to thank our dear panelists. I'm really impressed by your knowledge, by your different, very interesting insights regarding the topic that we have discussed today on environmentalism and feminism. Stay tuned with us for the next edition of the WOMENTUM Digital Saloon, talking divides in the women's rights movements. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, I'm Nusra Ayari, CEO MENA of the LEAF Initiative.
And I'm Jörg Schäfer, founder and CEO Europe. Together,
We thank you for watching the saloon.
I want to ask you to check out our YouTube channel and our website.
Stay tuned and do not hesitate to reach out to us.